Well, welcome to another edition of OTA on the Air, special edition for our Team 88 folks, which is our grassroots advocacy effort. So if you're interested in being part of Team 88, please reach out to us and we will add you to the list of folks who are members of Team 88 who develop relationship with local legislators to be able to move our initiatives forward. With me is Andrew Huffman with Governmental Policy Group. So thanks for being on with us today, Andrew.
Thank you, Tom.
So let's talk a little bit about the elections. We're on post-election side. Walk us through the state officer races, and then we'll get into the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was obviously the midterm elections are always important. We have on election day, we thought there would be a red wave nationally. We thought Republicans would do really well. And at the national level, it didn't turn out that way. But here in Ohio, there was a red wave, and it continues to move further to the conservative side of things. And we'll start with the top of the ticket with Governor DeWine. He was going against Nan Whaley, a Democrat out of Dayton, and he was extremely successful. He secured 63% of the vote, I believe. And there really wasn't much of a challenge there. And that's really the same for all the statewide offices. You had Attorney General Dave Yost, Auditor Keith Faber, Secretary of State Frank LaRose, and Treasurer Robert Sprague. They all won pretty handily and really didn't have much of a challenge. The real race, Tom, was for the U.S. Senate and who was going to replace Senator Rob Portman.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that was a big race that a lot of folks were watching, both in the state of Ohio, but also nationally as well. And J.D. Vance, relatively newcomer to the political scene, although he's done some political commentating for some national news networks, running against Tim Ryan, who was a longtime member of Congress from the Youngstown area, who was basically redistricted out of a district, which gave him the opportunity then to run for United States Senate. So I think early polling on that race had everyone a little concerned, but that started to turn towards the end, as well as then obviously the vote came through very handily, for one that was supposed to be a pretty close race for J.D. Vance to be the next United States Senator from Ohio.
Yeah, JD ran a great campaign, and so did Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan, yes, he lost the election, but he forced Republicans to throw millions and millions of dollars into this race. And that took away from some of the other U.S. Senate candidates in other states. So we talked about that red wave not really happening at the national level. This race had a lot to do with it because we were so focused on, the Republicans were so focused on getting JD elected and not losing that Rob Portman seat that they invested a ton of resources into this race. JD was successful, picking up 53% of the vote, but it was a good race, I think, on behalf of both candidates.
Yeah, and I had this argument with a reporter from Bloomberg on this, who's also ran this a couple times, and yeah, I mean, without question, the Republicans had to invest a considerable amount of money. I think they dropped about $30 million into Ohio late in the race to help out JD. But the reality is Ohio, while getting more conservative, is still, when you're talking about some of these races, still kind of a purple state. And I still think that plays itself out in other races as well. We saw the loss of Steve Shabbat, longtime congressman from Cincinnati, who's always been in a tough district, but that district then flipped over to the Democrat side. So I will say and have said numerous times that I think that Mitch McConnell made a mistake, or his advisors made a mistake by assuming that Ohio was a foregone conclusion in J.D. Vance's favor. Tim Ryan's a very strong candidate. He's one that has not been very polarizing for the most part. When it comes to a lot of these things, he ran against Speaker Pelosi, or now ex-Speaker Pelosi, in previous years. So yeah, I mean, and he ran a textbook campaign. I don't know that there was anybody else out there who ran a better campaign than he did. in that realm. So yeah, I mean, definitely needed to shift some resources this way. But that should have been resources they invested earlier on and made sure that they had budgeted for when they thought that they could just give it a go here, and it was almost a given that whoever the Republican candidate was would win. So yeah, so then let's talk a little bit about the Ohio legislature. You talk about the red wave. We picked up the Republicans picked up a number of seats in both the House and the Senate. Let's talk a little bit about the House first,
Yeah.
and talk us through that.
Yeah, well, and Tom, to backtrack a little bit, you talk about the Shabbat race. That was the one, our congressional races was the one area that Democrats actually had success in Ohio. You may remember Ohio lost the congressional seat. We go from 16 to 15 because of the most recent census. And a lot of folks thought that Republicans would run away with these races because I think I need to focus on the redistricting process a little bit. This has been, I don't want to say a disaster, but it's pretty close to a disaster. It's been extremely chaotic. And the Ohio Redistricting Commission is a 7-person panel made up of 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And they thought that this would lead to a bipartisan process of drawing Ohio's congressional and state house districts. And it's been the exact opposite. Every single map has been on a partisan basis that's been approved by the Redistricting Commission, and every single map was ruled unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court. So it really hasn't worked as it was designed. And I know that's been frustrating for a number of folks, but it's also been confusing for Ohio voters because of this uncertainty and the maps being ruled unconstitutional. It actually resulted in 2 primary elections for Ohioans. We voted on our statewide candidates and congressional candidates in May. And then in August, we had, I'll call it a special election for our state house primaries. And that voter turnout in August, I think it was less than 10%. It was just a really bad process this entire, really the last 2 years of redrawing.
Well, yeah, and the interesting part about that is when you talk about this, for our folks, they're listening is the current map is unconstitutional according to the Ohio Supreme Court. So the interesting part is that who you have potentially representing you in this election cycle may not be the same person next time, because they are going to have to go through this process again in that. And I was kind of saving the Supreme Court's the Ohio Supreme Court election for last, and we'll come back to this. I mean, it shows how important this is, but that's the interesting part is that the maps that are currently under use today, who you voted on in the early part of November, are unconstitutional according to the Ohio Supreme Court. So we're back at the drawing board, even though we've elected a group of folks to represent those areas.
And it's going to be the same process. It'll go through the Redistricting Commission, and it'll likely be challenged and go to the Supreme Court, which is why the Supreme Court races were so important to Republicans. But let's talk about the state house. This was races that we figured the Republicans would maintain control of both the Ohio House and Senate. They have super majorities right now, and it was a question of, do they maintain those super majorities? Are they able to grow their majorities in the House and Senate? And they did just that. In the Ohio House, they were able to pick up a number of seats, and they now have a 68-31 advantage in the Ohio House. That's the largest majority the Republicans held since 1967. So it really is just a historic majority. And then jumping to the Senate side, they have a 26-7 advantage in the Senate. They were able to defeat an incumbent senator, Tina Maharoth, who's a Democrat. They had a really good Republican candidate in a somewhat moderate district. So they were able to pick up a seat. And Tom, that's the largest majority Republicans had since 1951. And it wasn't too long ago when I started with the Ohio Senate about 13 years ago. Ohio truly was a purple state. The Democrats controlled the House. At the time, Democrats controlled most of the statewide offices, and the Senate Republicans controlled the Senate. But gosh, things have changed in the last decade for sure.
Yeah, and that creates its own unique set of problems. Coming from North Dakota, where you had that super majorities both in the House and the Senate. I mean, that creates a unique set of problems that happens a lot of times, is because you do have a variety of members that are in there, where you have folks who are extremely, in this case, conservative. And then you have some more moderate Republicans out there, and then those sects seem to kind of separate a little bit. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing in this process as we go forward. And you'll see that, right? When you have room to maneuver, meaning, you don't necessarily as a Republican have to vote with your party, that you can make some symbolic votes that complicate things. So, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how leadership manages those sides of it. And on the Senate side, let's get the easy one out first.
Yep.
The Senate reelected President Huffman to lead the Senate. So the Senate leadership will stay essentially pretty close to the same. I know that Jay Hottinger has termed out and has left public office. So then you have a spot open there. And then you probably have some other leadership changes that may or may not happen in the Senate, but the Senate will be fairly solid moving forward, as it has been this session.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Tom. And the Senate's just easier. There's a third of the members. So when you're dealing with 33 members, it's just easier to corral those folks and to have a unified front. And that was the case with President Matt Huffman. He has the support of his entire caucus. You bring up Jay Hottinger, a longtime state senator. He will be replaced with another longtime legislator, Kurt Scheuring from the Canton area. And then the rest of Huffman's leadership team will be Senator Rob McCauley as majority floor leader, and then Senator Teresa Gavarone of the Toledo area, Bowling Green area, who is the majority whip. So those legislators have been around, and we've had a great opportunity to work with every single one of them. And again, that goes back to the Senate. You get a bit more stability. There's less turnover, even with term limits. These legislators have been in office for some time. On the Democratic front, not surprisingly, you had Senator Nikki Antonio of the Cleveland area. She was elected to replace outgoing Minority Leader Kenny Yuko, longtime legislator, just a great person, but he was term limited. So Nikki Antonio will replace Yuko as the Minority Leader.
Yeah, the interesting part about that is Nikki has always been a good friend to the Trucking Association, especially when it comes to workforce development issues, and has always been somebody who's been very open to having that conversation. So I think there again, for our purposes, is a good thing. Not that Senator Yuko was not. It was just we just didn't have that well of a working relationship with him as we do, I think, with Senator. With Nikki. So I think that's definitely a good move for us on that side of it, and can help us out in particular areas when we're working on the Senate side for pieces of legislation.
Yep.
So let's tackle the House. You have Representative Cupp, who is the current speaker, or I guess Speaker Cupp, who will be term limited and leaving, and stepping down as speaker. So that leaves this leadership vacuum, if you will, in the House, and working through that process. As of today, there is at least an agreement by the Republicans to vote in a member as the next Speaker of the House, and that being Derek Marin from the Toledo area.
Yeah, Tom, and this was a three-person race really through the election. And in Ohio, most of the state house leadership races were already determined. Everyone knew who was going to be the Senate president, minority leader, but the big question was who was going to be the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. Bob Cupp, like you said, is term limited, not able to run again. So there was a hole there. And it was a three-person race. You had Representative Jason Stevens from Southern Ohio. You had Representative Derek Marin from the Toledo area. And then you had Representative Phil Plummer from the Dayton area. And part of the question wasn't who gets elected Speaker, but how long will they serve as Speaker? Derek Marin was selected by his peers to serve as Speaker. He is only able to be in the House of Representatives for 2 more years because of term limits, whereas Phil Plummer would have been able to serve for 4 years, and then Jason Stevens would have been a 6-year speaker. So not only are you looking at, if you're a member voting on the next speaker, looking at their beliefs and their leadership style, but you're also looking at how long they will actually serve, because that could create opportunities for an incumbent member, a new member, or it could kind of put everybody in their place for 6 years. So in the end, Derek Marin did win. He was able to pick up enough votes to be elected as speaker. He was able to do so only through a deal that was cut with Representative Phil Plummer, who again was in the running. So Phil Plummer will serve as Speaker pro tempore, the number 2 in the House. And then the rest of the leadership team is kind of a mixture of both camps. You have Representative Scott Wiggum of Worcester, who will serve as Majority Floor Leader. Representative Susan Manchester from Western Ohio will be the Assistant Majority Floor Leader. Brian Baldridge from Southern Ohio, his name was in the speakership running for a little while. He's going to be the Majority Whip. And then Representative Brian Stewart from Asheville, he's going to serve as the Assistant Majority Whip. So this all kind of came together actually last week very quickly. All 3 camps thought they had enough votes to be successful, but it ended up 2 of the speaker candidates had to team up to win.
Yeah, and which is not uncommon. I mean, that's something that happens a lot of times in these scenarios, is especially when you have a multiple person race. So from an interesting standpoint, this is a pretty common speaker election process. We've gone through some pretty significant trials and tribulations over the last few years with speakers running into some legal issues. So obviously the former Supreme Court justice in Speaker Cupp was a great choice there, and I think we're getting back to a little bit of normalcy from that perspective. And one thing that we as an association made sure that we did is we made sure that we kept ourselves unaligned, if you will, in that, making sure that whoever became speaker, however the process worked its way out, that we had supported everyone along the way. And all of them have been great friends of the association, and the current leadership team, as slated, have been, a long history of being great supporters of the association moving forward. So we put ourselves in a great position, regardless of who got elected speaker, because you just got to be a little bit careful in these scenarios, because you're never quite sure who's trading out to who and where those align. So I feel really good about how we played this process, and obviously something that we'll continue to do in the future to make sure that we support those who support us, as well as making sure that we don't get ourselves in a precarious situation by going out too far one way or the other in the event that does not work out that way.
Well, and Tom, to build on that, I know this webinar is for the Team 88 group, and as you attend our events and our advocacy efforts, you'll see that it's bipartisan. We're inviting Democrats, Republicans. We are so focused on the issues at hand, not really the politics behind it. And fortunately, like you said earlier, workforce development issues are bipartisan. Most of the issues that we take on and try to pass in the legislature, they're good business bills and good for Ohio, and you can sell that to anybody regardless of their political beliefs, and that's the case for all 3 speaker candidates. All have attended our events in the past, and we're not out here picking winners and losers. We're out here selling ideas and trying to promote good policy.
Yeah, so before we get into some specific bills, let's talk a little bit about why Team 88 is important and the process that we go through. And we go through this training every time, and we may update the training moving forward, but it's important for our members to understand that their legislators are there to serve them, and they're there to serve their district. They're there to learn about their district, and every one of them is wildly open to having those conversations, to meet with you at your place of work, to show them how your operation works, introduce them to your staff, to walk them around, to see what you do, is invaluable when it comes time for us to do the kind of work that we do. And it's all right to bring them on site. It's all right that they have a cup of coffee and a donut or whatever, and they're going through your facility, or going out with them and just talking about what sort of your challenges are, what sort of the cruxes that you tell me or Andrew or anyone else on the OTA staff, that these members of the legislature need to understand that. So please reach out if you need help. We're here to help you to be able to get a hold of them. We have relationships and contacts with these folks. We meet with these folks, and giving them the opportunity to see what you do in your business on a day-to-day basis and the challenges that you're having and some of the great things that you're doing to be able to move this economy forward and serve the citizens of Ohio as a business, as a cooperative business in the industry is extremely important. So please take advantage of that. Please reach out to your member to bring them out, to have them come with and take a look and see what you do. Don't be fearful of, lobbying laws and that side of it, because, we'll help you out with that. But just making sure that you just reach out to them and have that conversation, because all they want to do is learn. And that's one thing that I know Andrew would attest to as a former staff member and many years being as a lobbyist is, on any given day, these members will hear 10 different issues from 10 different industries, all jammed into the one-day session. And so they cannot be experts on that. So when it comes time for them to make a decision that impacts trucking, they want to know that they've got a friend in trucking back in their home district that can give them sound advice, and they don't know that until they've met you. So it's extremely important that you reach out to them. So let's circle back to some issues that we're tracking very closely now. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the process, now that the elections happened, that does not mean that the members in the legislature stop working. We have what's called a lame duck sessions coming up, so session days after the election. And the reason it's called lame duck is there's some members who either didn't get reelected or got termed out who will no longer serve in that house. So they have an opportunity to act, although they have been replaced by somebody else. So there's a lot of bills that get moved in lame duck just because it's the end of the session. And one of those is our distracted driving bill, which was passed by the House by an overwhelming majority. The interesting part is there was a couple changes made to the bill. The bill was originally a hands-free bill. There was 2 changes that were made to the bill prior to it being voted out. One of which would allow you to text while stopped at a stoplight. And the other provision would allow you to hold the phone to your ear, and it specifically says ear in the language, while driving. So you can still talk on a handheld phone. So it's not hands-free, but texting and driving in and of itself will be a primary offense in Ohio after this bill passed the House. And now goes in front of the Senate for the Senate to take action. So let's talk a little bit about how that process unfolds from your perspective, Andrew.
Yeah, and Tom, before we dive into the process, I do want to highlight the 2 sponsors of this bill, because they have been absolute rock stars. You have Representative Cindy Abrams, Republican from the Cincinnati area. She's a former law enforcement officer, just a great resource to have throughout this process. And then Representative Brian Lampton, Republican from Fairborn. Both have been absolutely amazing. This process started really 2 years ago with the governor, Governor DeWine, trying to get this done in a transportation budget. We weren't successful in that effort, and Representative Abrams and Lampton got together and said, we will introduce a standalone bill. And it hasn't been easy to get here. We've had a number of opponents. We've had a number of proponents that wanted to make this more strict. And I think we were able to find a balance here. And certainly enough, Tom, you talked about the final vote count in the House. The final count was 77-11. And that's overwhelming support for a bill like this. And it was because of a lot of efforts on behalf of your members. And we were able to build a coalition that consists of not only the trucking association, but also members of the insurance industry, highway safety advocates, local governments. Really, it's a huge group of proponents. And it has been a good process. It's just taken a little bit longer than we had hoped. And so the process moving forward is the bill is now out of the House and it is pending in the Ohio Senate. It hasn't even been referred to a committee yet. So it was just passed last week, which again was a great success, but we have until the end of the year to try to get this through to the Senate, which is why Team 88 and your advocacy efforts are so important, because Tom and I can make as many phone calls and hit all 33 senators, but it's really when you have that local touch and that face to the issue that puts you at an advantage. And so legislators are going to want to hear from their constituents, which is Team 88, which is why we've created Team 88, to put that local voice to issues. And that's why the next 3 weeks will be so important to really make this a priority for the Ohio Senate.
Yeah, without question. And I think the interesting part is while this was painfully slow in the House, the Senate has just a few days to act. And so I think it's important that members reach out to their senators and tell them that this is something that impacts your business. Obviously, we already know that 70+% of the accidents caused between a passenger vehicle and a truck are caused by some sort of error by the passenger vehicle. And that doesn't even include texting as part of the elements of that study. That study's so old that texting wasn't even an issue, right? And so we have a variety of accidents that happen, obviously because of distracted driving. And we already have a provision on the federal level for that. So getting a hold of your senator and saying, hey, this affects my business. And the different twist that we have is, this is our driver's workplace. So they're invading our workplace, they're making our workplaces unsafe, and then they're coming back and filing suit against us. And the only way to prove that they're texting and driving is we have to go through a very long process of subpoenaing their texting records, their cell phone records, in order to get through that process, because most people don't admit to doing that while they do it because they know it's wrong. So being able to eliminate the threat early, because you make it illegal, because it's something that the state will go out and talk about. It's actually part of the process of rolling this out, that the departments of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, the registrar's offices, have to make drivers aware when they renew that this is now a primary offense and is illegal. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely that process that goes into place that makes people understand that this is something they shouldn't be doing, something that's wrong. So obviously our top priority, and one that we would love to have your help on. The next issue that we're tracking right now in lame duck is our CDL tax credit. And just to refresh your memory on this has been a bill that we've been working on for 5 years, something like that, where it will give sole proprietorships, partnerships, and LLCs the opportunity to run a tax credit against their income tax for up to $25,000 to match $50,000 worth of expenditures for driver training. And this goes along with our driver training bills that we'll talk about next, primarily the CDL scholarship bill, but one that says that we get them out of truck driving school or from a different employer. We need to train them up and really finish them, if you will. So this provides you benefit for finishing. And really where this came from was there's a lot of other industries out there who receive grants and financial assistance from the state to upskill their workforce. But CDL drivers are written out of it from day one. And this is an opportunity for us to be able to provide money to the industry to reimburse you for the work that you do to upskill your drivers. So I guess, Andrew, tell us where the update is on that and how you see this thing playing out.
Yeah, again, Tom, we've been working on this for 5 years, and it's been introduced in 3 general assemblies now. And I do want to highlight the sponsors on this bill as well: Representative Reggie Stoltzfus, a Republican from Stark County, and then Representative Rodney Creech, who's turned into a great advocate for the profession and the industry from Preble County. And Tom, you did a great job of explaining the bill. What it is designed to do is to encourage trucking companies to invest in driver training. And this is more important, I think, now than ever before, given the entry-level driver training requirements and just the shortage that we're facing right now. So it's a good bill, and I say that because there's some safeguards in here. This isn't just a giveaway to trucking companies so they can collect, $25,000. This is they have to have skin in the game. You have to make a $50,000 investment in order to get 25 in order to get the tax credit. We also put a sunset provision in here, so if this isn't being utilized enough, and it's not leading to better trained and more trained drivers, then it goes away. We don't want to be a part of a program that's just not working. So we put a number of safeguards in here. It was unanimously passed by the House. I got to say that again, unanimously passed by the House. We worked so hard to get bipartisan support on this. There wasn't one opponent, not one opponent in the committee process that testified against this bill. We have a really good coalition of support, not only the trucking industry, but really there's so many industries that rely on CDL holders. So we were able to get support from the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, a few other statewide associations out there. And it really had a groundswell of support in the House. It then goes to the Senate, and it's just because of the election, not much has happened in 2022. And so after the election, we're facing 3 or 4 weeks of legislative sessions, and we have to rush to try to get something done. So the bill as is pending in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. It's had one hearing so far. We would hope that it can get through the Ways and Means Committee. Not just the Senate, but the legislature is always hesitant to pass tax credit bills, especially right before the main operating budget, which will be introduced in February of 2023. So that's our biggest hurdle right now. It's not whether this is a good idea or bad idea. It's, the total cost of this program is $3 million, which doesn't sound like much when you're dealing with a $70 billion budget, but they view this as
a huge surplus.
And having a huge surplus. But Tom, this is a combination of our efforts to address the driver shortage. And you mentioned the CDL scholarship program. I can't stress how successful that program has been. What Tom is referring to is the commercial truck driver student aid program that we created in the most recent operating budget. This is a $5 million scholarship program to help individuals cover the cost of CDL school. And I say it's been a great success. This is one of those things where it's almost like a field of dream type situation. If you do this, they will come. And we were telling legislators all the time, hey, we have a demand. This will get used. And sure enough, right when we passed this bill, within a few months, $2.5 million went to over 30 CDL schools, and all that money was used for CDL scholarships. So it's been a pretty successful program, and one that we hope we can build upon. So not to detract from the tax credit bill. Obviously, we're going to continue to fight for that, but unfortunately, maybe it's a fortunate thing. Ohio operates on a 2-year budget cycle. We were successful 2 years ago getting this scholarship program built, but we got to maintain it, and we're going to have to find funding for it in the next operating budget.
Yeah, without question. And there again, this is a sign of a very successful idea, a successful program, and one that the Department of Higher Education did an amazing job of understanding the need, understanding where the hurdles would be in administering this program and getting out of the way. I mean, they did an amazing job of saying, all right, we don't need them to go through this whole process of filling out all these applications and doing all this normal stuff that we have to for other grant and scholarship programs. Let's just streamline this thing, give it straight to the schools. The schools can then give it out to the students. And that $2.5 million was gone in a snap of a finger. The next 2.5 will be gone in another snap of a finger. And we need to find more funding sources for that. And I think the important part is this is an opportunity that we heard as a challenge coming from our CDL schools, as well as folks in the industry saying, hey, we can't get people into CDL school. And the biggest challenge is there's no financial aid. So if you're, and I say this with as much love as I can, because that was my first job as well. But if you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, you can't afford to take 6 weeks off from work to go to truck driving school and fork out that cash to pay for that tuition. Here is an opportunity for you to have somebody front the money to go to truck driving school, to get that under your belt, and get rid of that financial burden that comes with it. And so the interesting part is the way it's set up is, you get that all forgiven if you stay employed with an Ohio company for a year. So, I mean, it is very much driven around small business. It's driven around getting trained drivers into the system. And the timing of it with the entry-level driver training program could not have been better. So yeah, definitely, as you're having conversations with your members of the legislature, that you make sure that you talk with them about getting CDL scholarships renewed and increased in funding. This thing could be a 10, could be a $20 million program that is extremely successful. I'm looking very much forward to seeing the results of this first round of funding, to see how many people were funded, how many people completed the program, how many people are employed, how many people are still employed, or got employed and then now still employed. So, I mean, I think that's going to be, the devil's in the details and the data that comes out of this, but I'm looking very much forward to this. So let's circle back real quick to the Supreme Court races. We talked a little bit about those, and I think it's important that we talk about how much we went into that. There was 3 members that were up for re-election, one who was aspiring to be the next Chief Justice in Sharon Kennedy. Talk a little bit about what the importance of the Supreme Court is and how those election results came out.
Yeah, Tom, and this was, these, I should say, were races that we were heavily involved in, and I know you had members that were very active in supporting these candidates. And Sharon Kennedy was successful in being elected Supreme Court Chief Justice. Then you also had Republicans Pat Fisher and Pat DeWine re-elected as well. And the results, they're not going to change the makeup of the Ohio Supreme Court, but they could impact kind of the political leaning or the philosophical decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, because the current Chief Justice, Maureen O'Connor, she a Republican, but over the last year and a half, she's been siding with the Democrats on the redistricting maps. And so, Tom, to your point earlier, the legislature and the Ohio Redistricting Commission, they will be right back at redrawing the maps in 2023. And these maps will get challenged and they will go to the Ohio Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court races often get overlooked by the average Ohioan, but in this case, they were so vitally important because these races will impact Ohio's congressional districts and the Ohio House and Senate districts as well. So probably more so than ever before, the Supreme Court had a kind of a newfound focus and a newfound attention.
Yeah, in this industry, of many industries, have seen what happens when justices legislate from the bench. And so I think it was important for us, not necessarily to side with one political party or another on this, but jurists who felt as if that they had to abide by the letter of the law. We work obviously extremely hard with the legislature to make laws that make sense, that are applicable across the board, and that are actually fairly applied throughout the state, and being able to making sure that you understand the rules of the game and that the court will support what the intentions of the legislature is extremely important. And we felt like we had those in those 3 jurors.
Well, and Tom, this kind of goes back to Team 88 and just the advocacy and the involvement of your members. It was so cool to me, for lack of a better term, when I have Supreme Court justices and candidates reaching out to me saying, hey, I'm going to be in Cincinnati next week. I want to connect with a trucking company. Can you give me a name of one of your members? Or I'm going to be up in Toledo, or I'm going to be in Cleveland. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 calls. Every one of these candidates wanted to meet with a member of our association. And that's why Team 88 and our advocacy efforts are so vital, because you are giving elected officials, information, vital information, to allow them to make better decisions and more informed decisions. So that was just a neat process that we weren't begging them for meetings, they were begging us for meetings.
Yeah, and there again, if you want to be part of that, if you want to have a member of the legislature come and visit your facility, please reach out to me. tom@ohiotrucking.org is my email address. Reach out to me. We'd love to connect you with your member and both the House and the Senate, and get folks to see your facility and see what you do on an everyday basis. So please do that. And thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you all.